This morning's reading is from Deuteronomy 5, starting at verse 22, and I'll be reading through to chapter 6, verse 9. So Deuteronomy 5, starting at verse 22. These are the commandments of the Lord. These are the commandments the Lord proclaimed in a loud voice to your whole assembly there on the mountain, from out of the fire, the cloud, and the deep darkness. And he added nothing more. Then he wrote them on 2 stone tablets and gave them to me. When you heard the voice out of the darkness, while the mountain was ablaze with fire, all the leaders of your tribes and your elders came to me. And you said, the Lord our God has shown us his glory and his majesty, and we have heard his voice from the fire. Today we have seen that a person can live, even if God speaks with him. But now, why should we die? This great fire will consume us, and we will die if we hear the voice of the Lord our God any longer. For what mortal has ever heard the voice of the living God speaking out of fire as we have, and survived? Go near and listen to all that the Lord our God says. Then tell us whatever the Lord our God tells you. We will listen and obey. The Lord heard you when you spoke to me, and the Lord said to me, I have heard what this people said to you. Everything they said was good. Oh, that their hearts would be inclined to fear me and keep all my commands always, so that it might go well with them and their children forever. Go, tell them to return to their tents. But you stay here with me, that I may give you all the commands, decrees and laws you are to teach them to follow in the land I am giving them to possess. So be careful to do what the Lord your God has commanded you. Do not turn aside to the right or to the left. Walk in obedience to all that the Lord your God has commanded you, so that you may live and prosper and prolong your days in the land that you will possess. These are the commands, decrees and laws the Lord your God directed me to teach you, to observe in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess, so that you, your children and their children after them, may fear the Lord your God, as long as you live by keeping all his decrees and commands that I give you, and so that you may enjoy long life. Hear, O Israel, and be careful to obey, so that it may go well with you, and that you may increase greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your ancestors, promised you. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates.
Thanks, Glenn. So just leave that passage open there. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for your word. We thank you that your word speaks to us. You are a speaking God. And we pray that we might be listening to you now. And we might be we might be an obedient people. In Jesus' name, amen. One of my favourite movies is The Princess Bride. I don't know how many of you have seen that, but it's all about love. It's a love story. Well, it's got some great lines in it. If you haven't seen the movie, I encourage you to see it. It's a great movie. There's Buttercup and Wesley, who have the lovers in the story, and it's all about true love and the obstacles that true love will overcome in order for true love to... it's all about true love. Anyway, you need to watch me. There's lots of great lines in it. but I don't want to distract you with going through some of those, because otherwise that would be inconceivable. So we won't do that. Sorry about that. God talks about true love right throughout Deuteronomy. This phrase of loving God with everything that we are, with all our heart and mind and soul and strength, it's repeated time and time again through Deuteronomy. And this is and in this chapter 6 today, God calls for a true love for those who are his people. So far we've just been looking at the commandments, and now we're back with Moses is going over what it was like 40 years ago as the people were at the foot of Mount Sinai. And Moses recalls how in verse 22, beginning of our passage, how the commandments came across in a loud voice from God. And as Moses is getting the commandments there on Mount Sinai, there's loud noises, there's fire on the mountain, there's cloud all around the mountain, it's a pretty frightening scene. Later on in Hebrews, the writer to the Hebrews talks about that scene. It was something that was frightening to the people. And as they're watching, there's this interesting phrase there. It says in verse, just in the midst of all of this fire and the cloud and the darkness, it says at the end of verse 22, and he added nothing more. God gave the commandments and he added nothing more. Well, we know that there are lots more commandments, lots more regulations and laws that are given. The rest of Deuteronomy goes over those. All through Leviticus and a lot of Exodus, there's lots and lots of laws. But in some way, these 10 commandments sort of encapsulate the key things that God wanted to get across to his people. God didn't need to add anything extra to this summary of the whole law in the 10 commandments. Its emphasis and balance was just right, as we've seen as we look through them. It captured perfectly the spirit of how God expected his people to live and how he still expects us to live. And it's interesting how it's only those 10 commandments that God writes with his hand on the 2 stone tablets and gives to Moses. He doesn't do that with the rest of the commandments. And so they're very special. It's interesting, in the midst of these instructions and urgings to keep walking in obedience, if you look at verse 33, there's that idea of walking in obedience to all the Lord your God has commanded you. We saw that a couple of weeks ago, didn't we, in Galatians 5, where Paul took up this same idea of walking, and he says, walk in the Spirit. But in the midst of all of this, there at the foot of the mountain, the people are scared, and they cry out to God for a mediator. Can someone stand in our place? We're not really sure how God's going to act here. We know that if anyone sees God, they will automatically die. You know, he's not just a sort of lovey-dovey kind. God is powerful, and they knew that to see God could mean death for them. So they're scared stiff, and they're pleading to Moses, could you be the go-between for us, between us and God? They've seen what God is capable of doing. He's opened the Red Sea. He's done all sorts of things. He's provided manna, provided food for them in the desert. God is capable of powerful acts. And the people are saying, well, we just don't feel too confident in his presence. Have a look at verse 27. They say to Moses, can you go near and listen to all that the Lord our God says, and then you can come back and tell us, and then we'll listen and obey. You go and be next to God. So they're fearful of God as they see the fire and the cloud and all that's happening and all the noise. And they show that they don't really know God. Because yes, God is powerful, and yes, he is someone who just can't be approached willy-nilly, but he longs to draw close. He longs to have relationship with his people. And so what does he say to Moses in verse 28? Yes, it's good that they've asked you to be a mediator. That's good. But then look at verse 29. God goes on to say, "Oh, that their hearts would be inclined to fear me and keep all my commands always." God knows that, remember, this is way back at Mount Sinai, before the 40 years, before they've refused to go into the promised land and stuff. God knows that they're going to disobey him. God knows that they won't keep his commandments. Oh, that their hearts would be inclined to fear me. God's saying, I want them to prosper, I want them to flourish, but God knows their hearts. And this strikes at the very core of the commandments. At this point, it's interesting to note that there is, in a very real sense, another commandment which was even more important than the 10 Commandments. And you're saying, I thought you just told us the 10 Commandments are most important. In a sense, it's the underlying principle of the 10. And in chapter 6, verse 4 to 6, there are these famous words, the Shema. These are the words that Jews still today would say every day as they come into the house, as they begin the day with their prayers. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. This is the guiding principle and a summary of all the laws. Remember, Jesus quoted these words when someone said to him, what's the most important commandment? And he said, love the Lord your God. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul. He also said, and all your mind and all your strength. He said this was the most important commandment. What an important principle it is. You see, it's not just a matter of just doing things. What God wants is a change in here, a change of heart, so that our motivations are not just, I've done that rule, that's okay, I can do whatever else I want. But no, my whole being, my whole life, my whole inner self is directed to loving God. And we dare not forget this command. As we face new situations in the changing scenes of life, we're called to make fresh applications of God's law to our own age and culture. And as we meet each new challenge, the question we ask is, what does love for God compel us to do? That's the thing that we need to ask each day in all the situations we're in. And I want to focus on these 3 verses quite a bit this morning, or mainly this morning. And so let's have a look at them, and we're going to look at it in some detail. The phrase at the beginning, "Hear, O Israel." The Jews aren't just spectators of some powerful show that God's putting on. God is speaking to them. This God who rules the universe is a God who speaks to us. He gives us words of truth. He speaks directly to us. He's not just up there somewhere in the Ethernet, the ether, or whatever it is, up there anyway, whatever you call it. I'm not very good at my science. So after this call to listen, we have the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And it's interesting, before we're told of how we're to act, we're told who is this God that we're relating to. And there's 2 things here. The Lord our God, the Lord our God. God isn't some impersonal being out there, as some have claimed. He's not a God who created the world and then left it to its own devices, like some people talk about him being like a clockmaker. He's made the clock, he's made the world, and he's just left it, he's wound it up, and he leaves it just to let it go. No, he isn't like that. He is our God. He is supreme, he is Lord, but he's also personal. He's our God, and he longs for a relationship with us. So that's the first thing. Second thing is the Lord is one. A number of things are suggested here. We're not sure exactly what they are, but there's a lot of things here. One of the things is there's only one God. There's not multiple gods, as many religions were teaching, and most other religions had a number of gods for different things. God is saying there is one God. Second thing, God is incomparable. There's nothing or no one that compares with him. There's no one like God. No one can do the things that our God can do. And the third thing is, God isn't inwardly divided. Many of the other religions, they had these gods and they were constantly fighting with each other. No, that doesn't happen with our God. There are not different parts of him fighting for control of him. At the deepest level, God is unchangeable and consistent, faithful and true. It's the same idea when we say of a person, there's only one John, or there's only one Barb, or what we're saying is we're implying they're not inconsistent, they're not people who change or two-faced. In the same way, to say God is one is to say he is unchanging, he's consistent. We know that he will not change his mind on things. We can trust him absolutely. So this statement at the beginning of the Shema, which is what the Jews call these 3 verses, is critical. We need to know who it is we are worshipping, who it is we are to love. This isn't just a call. This isn't a call to just believe that there is something out there who is all-powerful. This is a call to love the one God who has made himself known to us and has committed himself to us in a covenant relationship. He wants relationship with us. So how is this relationship to be expressed? So the next verse, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. And we've heard this phrase many times. Oh yes, we should love God, blah, blah, blah. We all know that. We've heard that. Every Sunday they say that. But I want us just to ponder what these words mean. Particularly these 3 words, heart, soul and strength. The heart to the Jews wasn't the place of our emotions or feelings, as we think about it in Western culture, but it was our intellect, our will, our intentions. It's the heart that shapes where we're going, it makes the decisions, is what forms our character. It's the place where we make moral judgments. How am I going to act in these situations? The soul was the whole inner self, all our emotions, our desires, the characteristics that make each of us unique. Psalm 103 verse 1 captures this really well, where it says, the psalmist says, bless the Lord, O my soul, and then uses the same word here, but for soul. Then the psalmist expands on this and says, and all that is within me, bless his holy name. All that is within me. The soul is all that is within me. To love God then with all your heart and all your soul means with everything that you are, your whole self, your whole mental capacity, moral choices and your will, inner feelings and desires, the deepest roots of your life, everything that's you. But there's a third word, isn't there? And to these first 2 words, God adds another word in the Shema, and it's an interesting word, all your strength. Literally it means, and with all your very muchness. And with all your very muchness. And the word is mainly used as an adverb in the rest of the Old Testament, and it means greatly or exceedingly. But here it's a noun, and most translations have translated as strength. However, the earliest Jewish versions translated it as your substance or your possessions. That's interesting, isn't it? Which is kind of like all the stuff that sort of makes you who you are in this world, I guess, or what you treasure. Which is probably why Jesus actually, Matthew 6, verses 19 to 24, Jesus says, don't store up treasures on earth, but store up treasures in heaven. For where your treasure or possessions, here's this word here, are, there your heart will be also. So he's using a word that's there in the Shema that the Jews would be using every day to highlight to them about where their heart is. Where your treasure, Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And in Luke 12, Jesus tells the parable of the rich fool and says, a man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. There's that word again. And Jesus is using it because every Jew knew about these words, and they would say them as they entered the house. They knew this text. But it may also be that this third word is simply intensifying the other two as a climax. Love the Lord your God with total commitment, with your heart, with your total self, your soul, to total excess. Loving God should be over the top. So that's where this word over the top comes in. Loving God should be over the top. God calls us to over the top love. Well, what does that look like? We sort of know, we sort of have the idea, when someone goes over the top, they kind of just, it's almost like they lose it. That was really over the top, it was just too much. And I don't think it's a gushy emotionalism that is being talked about here, although we may well express this over-the-top love with lots of emotion. But here again, we look at Jesus. How did he love? How does Jesus love? For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son to die on the cross, to be rejected, to be laughed at, to be mocked, to be beaten. This is over-the-top love. It's a love which is a sacrificial love. It gives and it gives with no thought of what it deserves in repayment. It's other person-centred. It's that 1 Corinthians 13 again, isn't it? Remember we looked at that last year. Love is patient, kind, not self-seeking, not easily angered, not proud. All those things that often people might not see, but they're deep down in our soul, in our heart. And we see this in Jesus, over-the-top love. I've got a couple of other quotes here which might help us as we think about over-the-top love. Our love for God is tested by the question of whether we seek him or seek his gifts. Why do we seek God? For him? For a relationship with him, or just for what he can give us? The next one, the primary test of life is not service, but love, both for man and for God. God's not so much interested in, he did this and this and this, and he's got this particular position in the church, or he's done that and that. God's interested in our love for him and for others. Another one, God's lovers prove their love by their obedience. And this word obedience we'll hear this time and time again in Deuteronomy. You want to show over the top love? Keep looking at Jesus. Keep looking at God. Keep crying out to God to work in you so that you desire and display over the top love. But be aware that when you do this, and God will be very, very happy when you do this, but he may well bring things into your life that you may not think are best, as he patiently and lovingly through the Spirit seeks to change our hearts so that we may become more and more like him. If we're one of God's family, this is what we live for now. We live to be like Jesus. We live to become more like our Father, to be people who love the Lord with all our heart and soul to total excess. Now there's a few other thoughts in the chapter. I'll just, in verse 7 to 9, what are we to do with these commandments, especially the one about love the Lord with everything you've got and do it with over-the-top love? Well, verse 7 to 9, what are we told there? Impress these commandments on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down, when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands, bind them on your foreheads, write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. Two things here. Notice the instructions are not saying just do the legal thing of obeying the law. No, it's saying do everything you can to make this law so that it becomes internalized within us. It becomes internalized deep law. It's saying do everything you can to make this law go deep down in our hearts. Do anything that will help us. This isn't something that just... And the second thing is, this isn't something that just happens in a religious place. Notice here, it's not the minister here who's been told to get up and do a sermon and then we'll all go home and feel righteous. There's no mention of the temple, the synagogue, the tabernacle. This topic of the law and how we can love God over the top is to be the topic of ordinary conversation in ordinary places every day. It was to be the topic in the homes, in our lives, from breakfast to bedtime. Even have them tied on your hands and bind them on foreheads and put them on your door frames. You could probably put that first picture up now, Andrew. We can have that sitting there for a while. Here's the Jews had them actually literally tied to their heads. They had a phylactery on their heads and they had it tied around their hands. And then they... So there's a guy with it on his head and with it tied around his hands. And they also had it on their door frames. So as you came in the door, you would actually touch in this little door frame. They would have not door frame, in this little I've forgotten the word now. I just can't remember the word. But on this little mezuzot, that's it. Very good. Right. Oh, I haven't said that. Oh, okay, I'm sort of jumping ahead, aren't I? Yes. Thank you. I've got out of sequence here. In this mezuzot, they actually had the words of Deuteronomy 6, 5-7, written in there. So they would actually kiss the mezuzot as they were coming in, sort of to remind them that these words are important. I don't know what they did during COVID, because that wouldn't be a great idea to be touching it and kissing it. But anyway, I'm sure they worked out something to do there. So in these few words here, the law of God is to be applied in every area of our lives. In our individual lives, your hands and your foreheads, in your family, your houses, and in public. He mentions the gates, the place of public business, the courts, the markets, everywhere. We're to work out the meaning of loving God in appropriate ways for all three levels. The love commitment of the whole person in verse 5 is now expanded to the whole community in verse 7-9. Now, we may laugh at these particular things here, and I often just think, how legalistic these guys are, in doing this. They're just doing the outward actions, and often they would just, bind on the phylacteries just when they're doing their prayers, and then they'd take them off. So you sort of forget about it after that. But the question for us and for me is this: am I more serious or successful in flavouring the whole of life with conscious attention to the law of God than these guys? As a personal, familial and social strategy for living out my commitment to God totally, to loving Him over the top. Am I doing more than these guys? What am I doing in my life to remind me that I'm to love God with all my heart and all my soul, and to love Him with over-the-top love? How can I do this in an age where I'm being bombarded with all sorts of information and images? Maybe we could talk about that at morning tea. What are some of the ways that you practice that you actually remind yourself each day that you're God's person and that you are to love God with all your heart? One of the things we can do is to share what God has done in our life during the week. I was so encouraged a couple of weeks ago when Barb Algie shared about her grandson. Remember, Barb said that we'd been praying for her grandson, that he'd have his operation. Then it was cancelled. Bummer, Lord, can he have the operation sometime? And then she came in and told us, yes, he can have his operation on this day. And you know what? His mum's going to be off work for the next 2 weeks to look after him. How good is God? And so we could rejoice with Barb at the goodness of God in providing that operation at just the right time. And I think too of Daff too, when she had her operation, just the timing there. For Phoebe, yeah, just the timing for her operation was just the right time as well. We're reminded that God had answered prayer. In our prayer time this morning, which we're going to in a few minutes, which will be straight after this, I've asked Ash if we can have what I've called a testimony time, where we just share what God has done in our life, something like what Barb did. Is there something that God's taught us? Something that, as we've read the Bible, that God's spoken to us and ministered to us. Maybe something in a way that God has provided for us. Maybe something that an answered prayer, a new truth from His Word. Anything that helps us to love God with over-the-top love. Now, I've got a few other things I was going to say, but I think I'll leave it at that. I'll put the text up on in the email, and it'll be online as well. And so you can read the rest of the bit. It's a sneaky way, isn't it, eh? So let's go to our prayer time, and I'll hand over to Ash to lead us. But you might be thinking, is there something that I can share, something that God taught me this week that would encourage each other? Thanks a lot.